Guilt is something that everybody grapples with at one point or another. So what I want to do today is discuss the source of guilt, why it's there in the first place, why we carry it around with us for most of our lives on some level, and how you can free yourself of having this guilt. Because at the end of the day, it is one of the most debilitating feelings, and it will stop you from progressing on your spiritual path. But before I begin, if at any point you find that this information is helpful, then please like and subscribe so this video can reach more people who might also benefit from watching. The charade of the ego. Ultimately, the real source of guilt stems from our ego. It stems from this belief in separation. It is the very belief in separation that creates this feeling of guilt. Because really what we're feeling guilty about, whether we think it's about a certain circumstance or an event or something that we've done that we believe to be wrong, what we're really guilty about that's much further, much deeper down within us is this belief that we are separate from everything, that in fact we are separate from that one consciousness. And that is the source of all guilt. Because we've bought into this belief of separation, what happens is that guilt is inevitable. And whether or not you're aware of this guilt that you're carrying around, it's there if you're identifying with your ego, if you're identifying with this idea that you're a separate self. Your true self has no guilt. It's impossible for that pure, infinite consciousness to be carrying around this sense of guilt. And that is because it doesn't identify as being separate from all that is. So the real key that I want to make here, the point that I want you to understand, is that guilt is a sure sign that you are identifying with your ego. You can think of it like a reminder that's telling you, oh, I have this feeling of guilt, so that must mean that I have misidentified, that I am identifying with my egoic self and not my true self. The guiltless mind cannot suffer. There's a great line from A Course in Miracles, and it says, the guiltless mind cannot suffer. Think about that for a moment. If you are able to rid yourself of the feeling of guilt, then you cannot feel any form of suffering. Most of us are carrying around some low level of guilt, and it can appear in our lives in a myriad of ways. Things like, I feel like I'm not doing what I need to be doing in life, and therefore you feel guilty about that. Or, I didn't really do my best today, or I shouldn't have said that to so-and-so. These are all forms of guilt. These are all forms of beating ourselves up for not doing a better job, for not being the best self that we could possibly be. When you're suffering, you're feeling some form of negative emotion, obviously. And whether you realize it or not, guilt plays a huge role in that suffering. Because underneath some of the negative emotions you might be feeling, such as jealousy, such as rage, such as feeling hopeless or apathetic, underneath those feelings is this feeling of guilt. And the reason why the guilt is there is because you have separated from the truth of what you are. You have separated from this divinity that is you. And when you do that, you are going to feel guilty. That is just a fact. You might not realize this on a conscious level, but it is absolutely there, happening on a subconscious level, whether you realize it or not. What this guilt does that is so incredibly negative, especially as it pertains to your spiritual growth and progress, is that you are unable to practice forgiveness. Because forgiveness is letting yourself off the hook. Now, by no means does this mean that you can't acknowledge a wrongdoing. That is not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that the more and more you can start to identify these aspects within you where you are carrying this guilt, the more and more you can start to practice forgiveness. And by forgiveness, I mean allowing yourself to start letting go of these negative emotions that do not serve you. because that is very much in alignment with self-love. The more that you can relax and release all of these negative emotions that are truly not what you are. I mean, in fact, we're not any of our emotions, but the negative emotions pose these horrible blocks that stop you from progressing and remembering what it is that you truly are, which is that divinity, which is this oneness with all that is. The concept of time. The ego needs to survive. Just like anything else, it does not want to die. And the way that it does that is by allowing you to hold on to guilt. And it does this by making you feel that you are stuck in this loop of the past, because guilt is always having to do with the past. It's always something that you've done that has to do with a past event, or so that's what you think. Like I said just a minute ago, guilt is really stemming from this belief in separation. So it's something much, much deeper than the wrongdoing that you think that you've done. And you hold on to guilt. What you're doing is you're making this agreement with the part of yourself that is the ego. And you're telling yourself that you are willing to make a commitment to stay stuck in your past. The ego only has the past or the future to hold on to. Because in the moment, you have no ego. In the moment, there is only this infinite now, this power of being present. And when you're not present, you're either in the past or the future. And that's really where the ego resides. So guilt is always keeping you in this past state. And when you're stuck in the past, you're carrying that past, you're bringing that past with you into the now. Because there is only ever the now. There's nothing else. It's an illusion to think that there really is a past or a future. There's always just this infinite present moment that's happening right now. Now. Innocence is strength. This is another one of my favorite lines from A Course in Miracles. Innocence is strength and nothing else is strong. So what does this actually mean? It means that when we have believed, when we have bought into this idea that we are separate from all that is, then the byproduct of that is guilt. When we relinquish this feeling of guilt, we start to recognize our innocence. We start to recognize the purity, the truth, the innocence that is actually what we are. That is real strength. Because your power lies in remembering the truth of what you are, in remembering the divinity that is really you, not in feeling guilty. When you're feeling guilty, you're playing it small, and you have completely lost your power. You have no mode of really helping anyone when you're in a state of guilt and shame. That is not something that is going to be of benefit to you or to anyone else. So stop playing it small. Stop identifying with these feelings of separation, with these feelings of guilt. Why do you choose guilt? Why do we choose to feel guilty? Because it's very important to realize that this is in fact a choice. Nobody makes you feel a certain way. Everything that you feel is because you have taken your free will and you have decided, you have chosen to feel a certain way. Remember, the feeling of guilt is one of the most deeply rooted emotions that we carry around with us until we begin to liberate ourselves of identification with the ego. Anytime that you are feeling the slightest bit of guilt, and this is why I really want you to investigate within you if you are carrying any form of guilt whatsoever. Remember, when you're choosing your ego, you have chosen fear. And anytime you choose fear, you choose to play it small. You play your life very, very small. You are limited on some level, at some capacity, and you are blocking yourself from fully living, from fully being. Guilt and fear are also part of the same family because they feed off of one another. If you feel guilt, then you are afraid. And if you are afraid, then you have some form of guilt because your true limitless self doesn't have fear and it doesn't have guilt. Another key point that I want to make about guilt is that when you are feeling guilty, you have so removed yourself from that feeling of self-love. And guilt is confirming that you are less than, that you are not worthy of feeling good. And whenever you're not feeling good about something, it is an indication that you are not loving yourself. You need to feel that you are innocent, that you can love yourself again. And when you start to do that, that's when healing takes place, not only for yourself, but for others, for everyone around you. Because the guilt that you feel is definitely being projected onto others. And if they don't know how to stand their ground energetically, they're also going to be feeling guilty, and they might not understand why. Every time they come into your presence, they're going to feel heavy. There's a lack of lightness when you have guilt. Guilt is like a ball and chain that is pulling you down and everyone around you, unless the people around you have enough grounding and understanding of what it means to have their own sense of space. Letting go of guilt means choosing love. You've heard me say this over and over again in so many of my videos. But when you start to focus on letting go of guilt, what needs to happen in order to do that? Because I'm sure you're wondering, well, Margot, all this sounds great. I understand now maybe that guilt is coming from this belief in separation, but how do I actually let go of this guilt? The way you let go of guilt is by choosing love. And the love that you're feeling is for yourself. When you begin to decide that you do not want to carry around the feeling of guilt anymore, that you would rather feel that you are innocent, that you can love yourself, then the guilt just dissolves. It automatically starts to fade into the background. And it does that because you have decided that you want to feel a certain way. Remember, you get to decide, you get to choose how you want to relate to life, always. That is the one point of choice, the one point of free will that we really can enforce, is in the decision we make to how we relate to life. How do you want to relate to yourself? How is it that you want to feel? You get to make that decision. I know that's a very foreign concept to a lot of people, but it really is up to you. And it really is just a decision. You can say to yourself, I do not want to feel guilty anymore. I make the choice. I make the commitment to love myself. And when I am feeling good about things, specifically as it pertains to myself, then that is a real act of self-love. Another simple approach that you can take to releasing some of this guilt is to remember your true identity, to remember that you are not actually separate from the infinite, from that one beautiful, pure, divine consciousness that is you. You are not separate from it, ever. The only thing that separates it from you is your belief in all of these things that you are not, such as guilt, such as shame, such as fear. All of those things are what separate you from knowing the truth of what you are. Another way that you can approach getting rid of guilt is to stay in the present moment. Practice being present. Practice being here right now. Practice only focusing on the person or the task in front of you. And every single moment that you have is an opportunity to practice this. And when you do that, you are not carrying the past or the future into that now moment. Because in reality, the past and the future are absolutely gone. The past is in the past, and the future may never come in the way that you think that it will. So when you stay in the now moment, there is no way that you can carry any guilt, any fear into that moment, unless you decide in that moment that you want to do that. So the power that you have is remembering that you can stay present. And when you stay present, you free yourself of the shackles of guilt. Yogananda put this so elegantly. He said, to humble the ego is to discover one's true identity. And I couldn't agree more. The more and more that we stop identifying with this false self, the more we discover the beauty, the innocence, the guiltless, the fearless truth of what it is that we are. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, remember to let go. Let go of trying to be anything other than the truth of what you are.